Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with jazz musician, educator, podcaster, and lover of all things nerdy, Miguel Landestoy. Based out of Boston and as a multi-hyphenate, he is constantly looking towards the next step on his artistic journey and how he can better serve the artistic community. He is also a massive nerd who is huge into anime, epic fantasy, comic books, and how they intersect with BIPOC experience. We cover his career and the future ahead. Enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's great to meet you. And as you've said, you're coming out of Boston. I'm here in Kansas City. So it's great to connect. And I want to begin our conversation before we get into your music and your evolution as an artist by asking you 4 years ago, we were all wrapping our heads around the pandemic, and it really affected the musician community in a very specific way. So I'm curious, how did you make it through that time period, and how did it subsequently change the way that you either create now or do your business as a musician?
It was an interesting time for sure. I think I have a great pandemic, like finding out about the pandemic story. I mean, as you know, great is not the word, I guess, but I was looking to go to grad school. I was going to grad schools all over and auditioning and, you know, just doing the thing because I wanted to sit in the craft a little bit. I've been working as a musician, but I'd also been working as an arts administrator and teacher, and I was just kind of like, I want to sit and actually just do music for a while. So I auditioned all these grad schools. I kind of like toured around and figured it out. And I got into New England Conservatory here in Boston on like the week before the pandemic actually shut down, like the week before the city of Boston shut down. And I was kind of beside myself. I didn't know what to do none of us did. I didn't know if I was going to go to school, and or if I was going to keep working and just, you know, kind of delay until, the pandemic blew over. None of us had any information. And I decided to go. So I actually started grad school September of 2020 at NEC, and started, social distanced and all of the precautions we were taking due to the pandemic, and it was a wild ride. So that was a huge thing for me, just being able to be around other musicians and be working on my craft and doing all that. But also, a good friend of mine had really the only live music going on in Boston at the time at a local instrument shop that was having like people come through and actually play and getting people to get paid to play in a time where none of us were actually, gigging at all. So between grad school and some friends in the local scene really holding it together, we made it work.
So talk to me a little bit about how this jazz journey began for you.
Yeah, so I grew up classical. Not unlike other folks, I took lessons. And I was, I would say above average, I guess, as a kid, when it came to music. But it was, I started playing in like an alternative rock band in high school with a bunch of buddies. And it kind of brought me out of my shell a little bit, not having to have everything on the page, communicating with others. And that kind of delved out into playing jazz at school, and then eventually going to school for music. Now, but my undergrad I was still studying classical music, but I was just doing jazz things outside of there. And I remember when I was in kind of that transitionary period between high school and in college, I was kind of sitting in an all-state kind of jazz band situation, and I saw Terrell Stafford and his quintet play, and that was a pretty influential moment. I was like, the level of communication, the high level of playing, and just the freedom to be able to do whatever you want was very enticing. So I kept on like gigging and playing jazz kind of outside of school, and then once I left school, even though I was studying classical music there for the most part, I started gigging in earnest, 2-3 nights a week, trying to keep everything together. Also helped to pay the bills, obviously. It's definitely been a journey, because I've been mostly self-taught in that way, because I didn't really study jazz or improvisation with somebody else until I got to NEC and started doing stuff there through the contemporary improvisation program.
So talk to me a little bit about what is it that you like the best about being a professional musician? What is it that gets you up? What is it that motivates you every day to do this?
I like moving people. I like communicating with people. I like the give and take when I'm on the bandstand. I've often been told that I like when people intersect when I'm soloing or playing something a lot more than most other pianists, and I always wondered why that was. And I think the answer I came to was just like I like communication, and I enjoy when two or three or four or five people whomever's in the band. I love when the sum of our parts become something greater. I like playing solo piano, and it's great, but I think I just enjoy connecting with others. And for me, jazz has always been that big connection.
So talk to me about anything, albums, anything that you got either on the horizon or that's out there for people to pick up.
So I'm glad you asked that question, because I'm in the middle of kind of reinventing myself, I guess. I maybe 3 or 4 months out of grad school, I actually injured my right hand, which put a huge damper on a bunch of things. I had a couple of stuff in New York going on. I had just a bunch of projects going on with a few friends that I was really excited about to kind of get going, but a ligament in my right hand just kind of gave out. And I spent that next year, all of 2023, kind of in occupational therapy and physical therapy, just trying to get my hand back to where it had just been. So through that, I was trying to evaluate, okay, how can I still be musical and be a professional musician if I can't readily play? Because at the time, I could really only play 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes at a time without my hand just being in a bunch of pain. And I'm serious, Joe. It was I couldn't open doors. I couldn't hold a knife. It was
wow.
Yeah, it was not a pleasant time, So I started getting into a lot more of composition and writing a lot more. And I'm actually in the middle of writing the score to an audio drama for a book that my friend wrote, which has been a really rewarding experience, and just kind of bringing out the inner composer in me. And I also started a couple of podcasting projects, talking about art and pop culture from the perspective of artists of color, as well as just what brings artists of color joy. So between those couple of things and me, I'm finally getting back to the point where I'm playing and gigging fairly regularly again. My hand is I would say at 80-85%, and I'm kind of building from there.
So who have been influences? Who have been, whether it's people in music or otherwise, who have ultimately been kind of the fuel for you to be a professional musician and find your voice on your instrument?
Ooh, that's a great question. So when I was at NEC, I studied with Rand Blake, who is an amazing kind of pioneer when it comes to improvisation, and the way he thinks about taking in music and kind of replicating it into your own style was definitely a huge influence while I was at school. And I got to TA for him, and he kind of sit with him and sit in those ideas while we were in this like kind of dire time during the pandemic. So I really appreciate his influence for sure. I love hip hop and as well as just Latin Caribbean music, Afro-Latin music. My family's from the Dominican Republic, and I find that for me, if I could find a way to mix jazz, Afro-Latin music, hip-hop, and just my own voice, I would be in a beautiful, happy place. So, like any of those artists, be that like Latin jazz pianists like Rupa Kalba, or one of my other teachers, Enrique Eisenman, who's a Brazilian pianist. I just enjoy that fusion sound because it feels like very authentic to those specific artists, and I hope I can replicate that in my work.
So talk to me a little bit about the state of jazz today. As a player that is kind of really coming into the scene and seeing it unfold, you know, there's obviously a very deep history and lineage in jazz. But here in 2024, you know, especially after the pandemic, there was a lot of people that had to leave big cities like New York and even Boston to go back home and to get to a more affordable place. But now that kind of the dust is settling, live shows are happening, more albums are coming out, what's your take on the state of the community of jazz today?
I think it's pretty strong. I know we've all like taken a hit for sure. And while I think you're absolutely right that folks have left the big cities due to the pandemic, I still, you know, those big hubs, be that New York or for folks who are a bit more versatile, like Nashville, LA, from the experience I'm hearing from my friends, it's still alive and there. Chicago is still bumping when it comes to jazz. I think it's strong. I think we're still trying to find a voice and a kind of a direction. I see. I currently work at Berklee College of Music on the staff side as an academic advisor. So I talk to a lot of students about their goals, and I get hope a little bit when I'm hearing some of their music and what they're moving into. But I also don't always encourage them to go to those big cities until they are ready, or unless they really want to kind of live in that lifestyle, because it takes a toll. So I think with all the tools we have, the web and social media, et cetera, to share this stuff. I mean, for me, like, one of the things that gave me life during the pandemic for sure was just the YouTube series that Matt Cohen had going on. Just to be able to see like some of the best musicians in New York just play live. And while it's not the same as live music, nothing will be the same as, you know, the kind of the air changing when you're in a room full of people ready to listen to some killer players. I do think that more like the more access, the better entry point to jazz for most.
So at the end of the day, why do you love jazz?
Freedom. I enjoy the freedom of it. If I'm feeling dark that day and I'm playing, it's going to come out in my playing, and sometimes someone else needs to hear that. So for me, it's just one of the ultimate forms of expression. And I don't even necessarily consider myself a kind of someone who's set in the tradition as much as I'd like to. I want to learn more about it, but the fact that I can still call myself a jazz pianist and be recognized as one, even though I don't have that kind of traditional bebop background, even though I still do work on that stuff, is a testament to the art form itself. So it's the freedom of it.
So let me ask you this. If you could get into a time machine, so I'm curious, if you could get into a time machine and go back in time and see one jazz show anywhere, where are you going to go? What are you going to see?
Oh, probably Ahmad Jamal, Live at the Pershing.
Good choice.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite records, and it's one of those records that like put me on to the clink and clack of the like there was dinner happening. You know what I mean? Like there was food, there was drink, there was people, there was atmosphere. You know, I find that like while I appreciate music schools and conservatories and stuff like that, and they're producing wonderful musicians, there's something lost to just like being in a kind of dark bar with a bunch of people making noise, and you kind of entering that space and adding yourself to that space with music. And I always really loved the beginning of But Not For Me, that just like that little buzz in the room. It brings me a lot of nostalgia, even though I'd never experienced that era, you know.
So of all of the things that you've learned as a musician and that you've done in your career, what do you try to teach the next generation? What do you try to lend the younger players around you?
Do not compare yourself. There's 1,000 different ways to get to a successful point. You don't have to do it exactly how the buddy next to you is doing it, how Miguel Landestoy did it, how any number of famous jazz musicians did it. Because I think that comparison can get in the way of your own personal self-growth. It's one thing if you're doing a transcription, you're trying to figure out what your buddy's doing. That's great, and that's not comparison. That's the work. But if you're just constantly despairing yourself for not being able to do what the person next to you is doing, you're not even looking at yourself, you're not hearing yourself, and you're not going to be able to move forward. So put the blinders on, get in the practice room, figure it out, you know?
Yeah. So let me ask you this. Everyone out there has a perception of you. Family, friends, fans, students, but you ultimately run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm in the middle of trying to figure that out. I think I've always seen myself as a side man. Like I've played on records with some wonderful people, and it's always their record. And I'm, you know, just adding my voice to it and trying to elevate it as much as I can. But right now, I'm trying to put the focus back on me and my artistic identity, and always lead with kindness and respect. That's day one. That's for everything. But I'm trying to find that kind of leading man, that leading trio person. So it basically in progress. But I'm always kind. I'm always respectful, and I always try to bring the good vibe. But I'm also in the middle of trying to be a bit more assertive and making sure that my voice is heard.
So if anyone out there wants to listen to any of your music, you know, find out about live shows, anything about your world, where's the best place to go?
Yeah, check out my website. It's MiguelLandestoy.com. Just my first name, last name.com. It has links to a couple of great concerts that I've played, a recent duo record I've put out with my good buddy, saxophonist Brett Wahlberg, as well as links to my podcast projects where I talk about art and the perspective of artists of color in America today.
Perfect. Miguel, this has been wonderful, man. Thank you for your story. Thank you for your time. And, you know, I look forward to getting, you know, material in the future and putting it on Neon Jazz and celebrate the jazz, man.
I really appreciate it, Joe. Thanks for having me on, man.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, business, spirituality, music, and more from around the globe. Our esteemed theme music was composed and produced by the great E.E. Pointer of Kansas City's River Cow Orchestra. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.